Attention water treatment experts. Pyxis Lab is your trusted PTSA partner. Pyxis offers not only the world's leading devices for PTSA fluorescent detection, but also provide the tracer chemical at unbeatable prices. Our ST500 series of inline PTSA devices ensures widely accurate monitoring while compensating for color and turbidity. Protect your system assets today and gain peace of mind with Pyxis Lab. Don't settle for less when it comes to your water treatment needs. Go to scalinguph2o.com/Pyxis. Once again, that's scalinguph2o.com/PYXIS. Pyxis, because water professionals deserve better. Corrosion coupons, your first line of defense. Prevent unexpected failures and extend the life of your heat transfer equipment with our corrosion coupon analysis. Don't just send your corrosion coupons to any lab. Send your corrosion coupons to a lab that understands your water treatment needs. B Labs is run by water treaters for water treaters. At B Labs, every corrosion coupon report includes a picture of your corrosion coupon before and after cleaning, because a picture is worth 1,000 words. To find out more, go to scalinguph2o.com/B Labs and up your corrosion coupon game. Once again, that's scalinguph2o.com/BELABS. B Labs, corrosion coupon reports done right. Welcome to the Scaling Up H2O podcast, the podcast where we scale up on knowledge so we don't scale up our systems. My name is Trace Blackmore. I get the awesome honor of hosting this podcast. Thank you for joining us this week, and thank you for joining us every week. Of course, we release new episodes each and every Friday. So if you have not caught up on last week's episode, or maybe there was a Friday that you missed a couple of months back, don't ever worry about that, because whatever your favorite podcast player is, we have all of our episodes, of course, archived for you, ready for you to download and listen. By the way, there are so many people out there that don't know about the Scaling Up H2O podcast that are industrial water treaters that will only learn about this podcast through you. And I have to say, we have 20,000 subscribers because of people like you. But I know there's probably 100,000 more out there. And the only way we're going to get this podcast to them is for you to continue helping us. So the next time you talk to a colleague, make sure you bring up the Scaling Up H2O podcast, and you might even have to get them to download their podcast player. Maybe they're unfamiliar with what the podcast concept is. So there might be a conversation around that. And then you can help them subscribe to the Scaling Up H2O podcast. So each and every Friday, they will be notified of a new episode. And I have met so many people at trade shows and conferences where they just learned about the Scaling Up H2O podcast. And they can't believe that there's over 400 episodes out there that they can devour on their own time. And it's so fun to see people see the entire catalog of shows of over 400 episodes. And they just get so excited. Oh my gosh, all this stuff is for free. All this stuff is for me to listen on my time when I'm driving from account to account. All of this content is for me to become a better industrial water treater. And of course, all those answers are true. And it's just really cool to see people go through that. They're almost overwhelmed. And then there was one individual that listened to hundreds of episodes in a matter of months. So I don't know what they did in between, but they listened to the entire archive of the Scaling Up H2O podcast. And then they wrote back to me, oh my gosh, I listened to 400 episodes over the last quarter. Again, don't know how they did that, but it was pretty impressive. So not a contest by any means, But I just want the Scaling Up Nation to know that the only way we're going to find that next water treater that doesn't know about this podcast is through you. So thank you, Scaling Up Nation, for helping us get our message out there and helping us raise the bar in the industrial water treatment industry, one water treater at a time. And so many people at those same conferences and trade shows that I just mentioned are coming up to me and saying that they did something different because they were inspired to do so from this podcast. And that means we are raising the bar within this industry. People are thinking a little bit differently about what they do day to day. They're thinking that maybe I won't do the same exact thing, the same exact way I did it yesterday. I'm going to mix it up a little bit. And now I'm going to get some different information. Now maybe I'm going to get some better information. And now I'm able to better understand my system. I'm able to better understand my test. I'm able to better understand my products. I'm able to better understand my customer. Folks, the list goes on. When you change and challenge the way you do things, you're going to see things differently. And when you see things differently, you will get better as a result. So I challenge you, don't do the same thing over and over again. Continue to do the things that you have to do, but how are you looking at them? Can you look at them in a little different way so you get different information? Can you do them in a little different way so you get better understanding of what you are doing? I get people that tell me they do that all the time, and that is raising the bar in the industrial water treatment industry. Well, speaking of these trade shows and conferences, here are a few that you might want to look into. So the annual conference for the California Water Environment Association is taking place in Palm Springs, California, April 22nd through 25th. And this is a platform that provides education, networking, and discussion on emerging topics all around wastewater. So if that is an area of interest for you, you definitely want to check that out on our events page. And then while you're there, look at the Industrial Water Conference that's taking place in Columbus, Ohio, June 23rd through June 25th. This conference is put on in partnership between the Water Environment Federation and the Water Reuse Association. And we're going to have all the information that you need on our events page. Now, our events page can be accessed very easily by going to scalinguph2o.com, going /events, or but just by navigating over to our events section. You'll not only see the 2 conferences that we mentioned on this show, you will see everything that we know about in the world of water. So that is a great way for you to figure out where you are going to be. And Nation, I would absolutely hate it if there was a conference in your backyard that you did not know about, that you didn't even have to travel to, and you could have met somebody that answered that question that you have. You could have learned that one key bit of information that you were wondering about on that account that you are struggling with. So by all means, please go to scalinguph2o.com, go over to our events section, and figure out where you're going this year. Trust me, you will be glad that you did. Scale Up Nation, before we get to our interview, we're going to go ahead and go to every water treater's favorite game show. And of course, that is What Do You Know?
Hello and welcome to What Do You Know? The game show where we find out what do you know about industrial water treatment, drop by drop. So pump up your brain, take out that test kit of knowledge, and prepare to answer this week's question on What Do You Know? Today's question is, what do you call the attraction of water molecules to each other that gives water its unique properties, such as a high surface tension, high boiling point, and ability to dissolve many substances? It is called hydrogen bonding. You knew I would throw this into the mix eventually, because after all, hydrogen bonding is my favorite type of chemical bonding. I'm James McDonald, and thanks for playing along with us. Stay tuned for next week's episode of What Do You Know?
Thank you, James. What do you know? Of course, the water treater's favorite game show that increases your water treatment knowledge drop by drop. I love all these ideas that James comes up with, and I also love that so many people keep up with that, and they do indeed increase how you're thinking on water, things that you're doing, exactly what we were talking about in the beginning of this episode. Well, Nation, I am super excited to bring to you a returning guest. Here's that interview. My lab partner today is returning guest, one of my favorite people on the planet. Of course, I'm talking about Tim Fulton. Tim, welcome back to the Scaling Up H2O podcast.
Hey, Trace, it's great to be back. Thank you for having me.
Well, and I was actually looking back at the different episodes you've been on. I think you've been on more than 4 episodes. This would be number 4 according to our research, but you were on very early episode 22. You then came back and spoke with us on top talents on episode 280. And then it was episode 368 when you came back again and you updated your top talent with us in the Scaling Up Nation on what we learned from the pandemic. So I want to know, what have you been up to since that time?
Well, busy as usual. I'm doing a lot of traveling. As I shared with you, I'm in Portland, Oregon today. I speak to a lot of different Vistage groups around the country. Vistage is a large peer group for CEOs, and I'm fortunate that I get invited to come speak to a lot of different groups around the country. I also have 2 Vistage groups of my own that I co-chair. And then I've got a number of coaching clients. I've got maybe 20 different coaching clients that I work with in different capacities. And that all combined seems to keep me busy and out of trouble.
Out of trouble. I love that you added that. Well, Tim, every time you come on the podcast, such great information you have to share. And a lot of people are thinking, how are we going to get better? How are we going to take the information that we've had from the past? How do we have all these metrics, all of this data, and how do we apply that looking forward? So, Tim, of course, I'm talking about strategic planning, and I'm just going to start off with a very general question. What is strategic planning?
One of my favorite quotes is strategic planning is a way of creating certainty in an uncertain world. Daniel Pink is one of my favorite authors, and I heard him speak just about a year ago. And he started off his presentation with the following: never in the history of business have we faced as much uncertainty as we face today. And at the time, it was continued uncertainty around a pandemic, around COVID, uncertainty around world affairs, right? What's going on in the Middle East, what's going on in Ukraine, uncertainty around an economy that seemed to be getting better, but nobody felt like it was getting better, uncertainty around interest rates, uncertainty around employees, as you referenced earlier. Do they want to come to the office? Do they want to work from home? Do they want to do both? Never in the history of business have we faced as much uncertainty as we face today. So strategic planning, I think, is a way of making sense of that uncertainty, particularly over those things that we can control within our own business. Because as you know, at the end of the day, we can't control what's going on in the Middle East. We can't control what's going on with COVID. We can only control that is within our grasp. That is whatever is in our business. So that's what strategic planning is. And another way of looking at strategic planning is it's essentially answering 3 questions. And those 3 questions are: where have we been? What's our history? Where are we coming from? Second question: where are we today? What does the company look like today? And in terms of our strengths, our weaknesses, our financial performance, our people, where are we today? And then the third question is then, as you might imagine, is then looking forward and asking the question, and where are we going? What's our vision? 5 year, 3 year goals. How about next year? What is it that we want to achieve next year? So it's about answering those three questions.
Tim, I'm sure that there are a lot of business owners that are listening today, but we also have a lot of people that work for companies and they don't own the business. So, is this an episode that they should hit skip on and go to the next one? Why should they pay attention?
That's a great question, and please, if you're out there, don't stop listening, because I think the strategic plan, certainly it's important for the owner, the founder, the CEO, and yet who's going to execute the plan? It's usually not them. It's you, the manager, the supervisor, the number two person. You're usually responsible for executing the plan. And what I tell my CEOs is you've got to involve those people. They're as important in creating the plan as you are, because one, the only way you're going to get their buy-in is by involving them in the development of the plan. And then secondly, the success of the plan going forward is dependent upon them saying, okay, this is what we're going to do this year. These are our goals. These are our strategies, and deciding, okay, let's implement this plan. Who's going to be in charge of the sales part? Who's going to be in charge of the operations part? So it's just as critical that they're involved as the owners of the company.
One of our shared favorite authors, Patrick Lencioni, I believe he says no weigh in equals no buy in.
100%. And then that's why, unfortunately, a lot of plans fail, because it's the owner's plan, not the company plan. And at some point, the employees say, well, that's what Trace wants to do. He didn't talk to us about this. And why should I care whether it's successful or not?
So, laying the groundwork for that, who should be involved when it comes to strategic planning?
Yeah, and that's a question that I get asked often when I facilitate, or sometimes I call it officiate, offsite planning meetings, is who should be involved. From a numbers point of view, for me, I've found optimal numbers usually 12 to 15 people. And that'll usually, for a small, mid-sized company, that'll usually include the president, the CEO, vice presidents, the first maybe top third or so of a company's organizational chart. And yet I'll also sometimes suggest maybe one or two people further down the chart, because they've got a different perspective on the business. They see things that maybe the owner or the vice presidents don't see. They've got ideas that maybe would not percolate up, from the top part of the company. So I think it's helpful to get some input from maybe a little further down the organizational chart as well.
And Tim, as we're preparing for that, what data, what history should we have as we get ready for that meeting?
Yeah, usually where I'll start off a planning session, Trace, is that look back, and I'll just say, let's talk about highlights. It's as if we're putting together a CNN reel, for the year, say 2024, and what would be on that 1 minute highlight reel? What went well? Well, we added new clients, and we hit our budget goals, and we came out with that new product that we had talked about, and we bought that piece of equipment that we never thought we would get to. So let's identify the highlights, and then flip side, let's talk about the lowlights, and let's put together that same CNN reel of lowlights. These are things that we tried to forget, like losing that client, losing that key employee, that little mishap with the technology midway through the year. But it's important, because if we don't identify those, if we don't recognize those, we're at risk of repeating those failures from the previous year. So we'll look backwards and look at highlights and lowlights. I also think it's important to take a good look at our financial results from the previous year. Did we hit budget, above, below, key metrics? How did we perform on those from the previous year as well?
Tim, a tool you taught me, I hate to say almost 20 years ago, was the SWOT analysis. Is it a good idea to do that? And what is that?
Yeah. So then when we go from looking at the past to looking at the current, the most popular tool is the SWOT analysis. This is a device, a planning device of sort that was created by a group of professors at Stanford University back in the 1960s. And it's just a way of taking a thorough look at what does a company look like today in terms of our strengths, things that we're doing well, weaknesses, these are our deficiencies, these are things that we're not doing so well. Those are internal factors, those strengths and weaknesses, internal meaning within the business. And then we turn our attention outside of the business and we say, okay, what's going on outside of the business? One, in terms of opportunities, things maybe within the economy that favor our company, things going on within the industry that may impact our business, things going on within the markets that we serve. And then we look at external threats, things that may thwart our efforts going forward. Again, could be something in the economy, something in our industries, a technical threat. Trace a lot of companies now are taking a look at artificial intelligence, and they see both an opportunity and a threat. Is okay, I see how this could help us, going forward in terms of managing data, in terms of doing maybe some basic, customer service work. But at the same time, AI, I think, poses a threat to companies in different ways. So that's when I'm doing SWOT analysis, that's usually one of the first things that come up is let's talk about AI in both as an opportunity and a threat.
I remember in one of our meetings, you had taught me that you did not necessarily have to do the SWOT analysis in the SWOT order. You could do it in reverse. And if I recall, doing it in the regular order, starting with S, allowed you to more think internally. But if you did the TOES version, which is SWOT spelled backwards, you're looking more externally. And it is amazing how that changes the conversation.
Yeah, and that came from a client a number of years ago. And his rationale was, we tend to spend, because we start with the strengths and weaknesses, we tend to spend too much time working on those and not enough time focusing on what's going on outside of the company, the opportunities and threats. And then we get surprised. We get surprised when the economy takes a dip and we didn't expect that. We get surprised when there's some new competitor that we didn't identify and plan around. So that was their idea, that let's start with the externals and then work our way to the internal factors.
Yeah, I try to keep track of what I use with my team. So if we do the SWOT one year, the next year we'll do TOES.
That's a great idea.
Tim, I'm sure there are people out there that said, I think this is great to listen to. Tim's got a great voice. Trace is interviewing him very well, but I've never done this before, and I don't see myself doing this. So why should companies strategically plan?
Well, I'll start with why I think many of them don't. And it's a large number. The SBA, the Small Business Administration, does a lot of research on this kind of stuff. And the last numbers I saw, it was less than 20%. Less than 20% of all small businesses have any type of formal plan. And that could be a strategic plan, it could be a marketing plan, it could be a financial plan, could be an operations plan, a napkin plan, anything on paper, less than 20%. And I was fascinated by that when I first saw it, because I just assumed that everybody had some type of plan. And then when I ask, I get a variety of different reasons. It's, I don't know how to do planning. So I haven't read the book. I haven't attended the class. I don't have time. We're busy. How can I stop what we're doing for a day or two and take my executive team off site to do planning? And one way that I've heard that described is it's doing a plan in the midst of the year. It's like fixing a flat tire on a car going 60 miles an hour. It's hard. You've got to pull the car over. You've got to stop. You've got to jack it up, take off the old tire, put on the new tire. Same thing with business planning. You've got to take that day or two, stop what you're doing, hit the pause button and get off site someplace and get in the right frame of mind to do strategic planning. The other thing I hear sometimes, Trace, is, this is my second or third business. I've done this before. Why do I need to do planning? And yet I saw a statistic that the failure rate on second businesses is higher than the failure rate on first businesses. And I think to some degree it's due to what's referred to as hubris. Hubris is, I've done this before. I know what I'm doing. I don't need to do any formal planning. And yet the reality is every business needs to do some bit of planning. Trace, at the end of the day, what I found is the biggest obstacle to planning, I think, for many business owners is fear, because the fear of what I might find out, the fear of I might be wrong, I might be making certain assumptions that are incorrect, the fear that I've got the wrong people on the bus, so to speak, and thus that'll impact the quality of the plan. It's just fear, I think, is what gets in the way of many small businesses from doing formal strategic planning, and that's where you come into play. That's where I come into play, is helping business owners overcome that element of fear and say, let's get to it. Let's do some planning. Fear, I think, is the biggest obstacle.
I definitely experienced that when I started doing this type of planning with my team. And the fear was I did something wrong or I had a blind spot. And I used the book, The Five Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni, to really identify, okay, how do I identify why I have that fear and what can I do about it? And what you do about it is you go through it. You be vulnerable. And by being vulnerable, well, if the car has a flat tire at 60 miles an hour, you can't keep going 60 miles an hour. You've got to pull that thing over. So, and chances are people know there's a flat tire. So you're not hiding anything from anybody. So by being vulnerable, you encourage the entire team to have that trust with each other, and it encourages them to then be vulnerable themselves. So, you working with teams, what's your experience with that?
100%. It starts with the owner of the business acknowledging that I don't have all the answers and I need help. I need you, Mr. VP of Sales, and you, Mr. Director of Operations. I need you in a room with me. And you said it. Start with, where are blind spots? What are we not thinking about? What are we not working on? Where have we failed in the past? And where are the opportunities going forward? So it really does start with the leader of the company acknowledging that and saying, let's go forward. Let's do this.
I also want to add that it's not just that leadership team meeting, it's also the departmental meeting. So whoever is leading that meeting, their job is to be vulnerable because that creates that trustworthiness throughout the entire meeting.
Yeah. And Trace, I'm glad you said that, because like going back to the SWOT analysis, the SWOT analysis can certainly be done at a corporate level, but it can also be done at a department level, at a divisional level, at a team level, and it can be done at any point during the year. You don't have to wait to the beginning of the year or the end of the year. It could be June, and you could be having your team meeting and just say, hey, let's do a SWOT analysis. Let's see where we're at, mid-year at any level of the organization. Absolutely.
Tim, you mentioned that these types of meetings should be done offsite. Why is that?
Yeah, I can remember, Trace, early on as a business owner, I didn't use an outside facilitator. I said, hey, I can do this myself, and we'll just do it right here in the office. And I would gather my team together, and there were a dozen or so maybe at the time. And I found it was very hard. I didn't realize at the time to both participate in the planning and facilitate the planning, because those are two very different roles in this process of strategic planning. And so I would have been far better off having kind of a neutral party come in and facilitate kind of what I do now for companies. And it was easy to get distracted in our office because the phone would ring, somebody would come in, whatever the distractions might be. And that can only upset, the strategic planning process. I find it's far more productive to get off site for a day a boardroom, a meeting room, a hotel, meeting room someplace. And it just changes the mindset, because now we're taking people out of where they're used to being at their desk in their office and putting them in call it a neutral surroundings. And for whatever reason, the brain just operates at a different level, which is what we want. We want to be working at a more strategic level, in terms of altitude, at a higher level. And that just happens naturally when we get off site versus in our more custom surroundings.
Now, maybe there's somebody listening, they're just in their new building. All they can do is afford the rent on that new building, and they can't afford to get a hotel conference room somewhere. Are there things that you can do that create that mindset, but still stay in your facility?
There are. I think one would be, again, bringing in a third party to facilitate. Two would be maybe doing it in the evening, doing it on a Saturday, a time that you wouldn't normally be working in the office. You could, sometimes just little things is you could just kind of decorate the room in a way that just makes it feel different than it does during the normal 9 to 5 weekdays. So yeah, I think there are some things you could do that would at least give it a different feel than normal.
And Tim, something that you've taught me in my facilitation is always start with some sort of icebreaker that allows people to start thinking differently. This isn't the same day-to-day stuff. This is us getting above the day-to-day so we can work on the day-to-day. As people are trying to figure out how to start their meetings, what are some things they should think about with those activities?
Trace, that's a great idea, because this is not only a planning session, this is also it's a team building exercise. A whole strategic planning is a team building exercise, getting our team together to do something different than what we normally do. And so I use a number of different icebreakers depending on, one, how well they know each other, the planning team. Yeah, have they done this before? So it can be as simple. You mentioned Patrick Lencioni, and he introduces just a very simple icebreaker. And it's 3 questions. It's, where did you grow up? Tell us about your family. And the third question, my favorite, is, what was the biggest challenge you faced growing up as a child? And Trace, it's amazing how just those 3 questions, very simple questions, help break up some of the uncertainty within a team, and certainly in terms of what they know about each other. Because inevitably someone will say, wow, I didn't know that you grew up in Atlanta, or I didn't know that you had 5 siblings, or I didn't know that, like for me, I moved as a child 6 different times, and we were never anywhere for more than about 2 years. So I was constantly having to make new friends and start over in school. And to some degree, as a child, that was a challenge, but it also prepared me later in life to changing jobs, changing companies, changing organizations. So it's just amazing how a very simple icebreaker can change the mindset, the team mindset, and then prepares the team for doing something different, because we don't do strategic planning every day. So essentially, you need to just change the team mindset a little bit and get them refocused on something that they're just not accustomed to doing.
Scaling Up Nation, we're going to take a quick break to hear from one of our sponsors. Are your glycol systems protected and operating at their best? Thermal Fluid Technologies is here to ensure they are. Trusted by industry professionals for over 25 years, their Protocol heat transfer fluids provide unmatched corrosion protection and system performance for industrial HVAC, process heating and cooling, and food and beverage applications. Need a clean start? Their cleaner and degreaser prepare your system for years of trouble-free service. And their state-of-the-art lab offers one of the most comprehensive coolant testing programs available. Upgrade your system's performance today with Thermal Fluid Technologies. To learn more about Thermal Fluid Technologies, go to scalinguph2o.com/TFT. Once again, that's scalinguph2o.com/TFT. Thermal Fluid Technologies, where performance meets peace of mind. A special thank you to all of our sponsors for their support. Now, let's get back to our interview. Now, Tim, I want to say the best time is probably the end of the year that you're in to do strategic planning, but that's not the only time that you can do that. What if you missed, like this episode isn't airing the end of the year? So when can you do strategic planning?
The simple answer, Trace, is you can do strategic planning at any point during the year. There's no, even though it may be optimal to do at the end of your fiscal year, usually the end of the calendar year or the beginning. I've worked with companies in June. I've worked with companies in August. Maybe it's work coming up with the plan. Maybe it's refining the plan. Maybe it's starting over with a strategic plan because there's been an acquisition. There's been a significant change in the organization of the business. So I don't want anyone to think, well, I have to wait till December or January. It can be done at any point in time.
One of my favorite things to do is then 90 days later, how did we do on that plan? Did we actually execute on the things we said we needed to do this quarter? And then what did we learn from the last quarter? What was life trying to teach us that we can apply this next 90 days?
Yeah, and that's what I recommend is once the plan is done, that the team gets back together, review the plan maybe monthly, just quick, hey, what did we get done? What do we need to work on? And then once a quarter, get back together to the same group and let's take a more in-depth look, because at that point, things may have changed where you say, well, that particular strategy doesn't make sense, and there's something else we should be looking at. And then included in that is usually looking at the financials and are we achieving the financial goals that we set out? And again, if not, do we need to reset any of those? But yeah, at least once a quarter, an in-depth look at the plan. What have we accomplished? What do we need to work on? Maybe what do we need to eliminate?
Tim, when you're creating that plan, is there a checklist that you can go through to say, yes, we did what we were supposed to do, and this is a successful plan?
Yeah, what I like to see companies use is once they've got that kind of one-page business plan, is then to use color code. When something gets accomplished, we highlight it in green. When we are in the process of achieving that goal or implementing that strategy, it gets a yellow. And if there's something that we've just said, hey, we have failed, or we're just not going to do that, then it gets a highlighted in red, so that visually, when we're looking at one-page business plan, we get a sense of what's getting done, what are we working on, what have we stopped. So I like using some type of color code, but I'm sure there are other ways of achieving the same objective.
Tim, in one of our many meetings that we've had, I remember you were looking at a plan that we had, and you looked at me and you asked, how do you know that you're winning? And you used the analogy, Trace, you're at a baseball game and they're not keeping score. So how do we know that we're keeping score properly?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one is making sure that when we're establishing our goals, our objectives, is as much as possible making sure there's some measurement to that goal. Because too often I see companies, they'll set a goal like improve customer service. Well, that's nice, but how much is it? And how are we measuring customer service? What's the baseline? How much of an improvement do we want? So there's got to be some way of measuring, those goals. You've heard the term SMART goals, specific, measurable, attainable. There's got to be some way of keeping score of those goals, because otherwise we find ourselves maybe that first quarterly meeting and we say, well, yeah, we worked on that, but we didn't really determine what a win looks like. And we've got to be able to know whether we're winning, we're losing, we're just kind of keeping our head above water.
Well, by you using that baseball analogy, you went on to say, wouldn't you be annoyed that you couldn't keep up with who was winning at that baseball game? And I was just thinking, I never thought of that. All the people that are executing these things from this plan, they probably are annoyed, or maybe they don't realize that that's the feeling that they have. So by keeping score, not only do we know that we're winning, we know what we need to work on, but everybody knows where they are. And there's just a sense of satisfaction when you know where you are.
There's a relatively new planning tool that I find is getting a lot of traction. It's called Objectives and Key Results. And it's meant to be used on a quarterly basis. Once the plan has been established, we've got the one-page business plan, our goals, our strategies, tactics. Then on a quarterly basis, we establish objectives and key results. Objectives are qualitative in nature. Qualitative meaning there's not a measurement necessarily. But then along with that objective, we then come up with usually 2 to 3 key results. So going back to my examples, let's say the objective is let's improve customer service. Let's focus on customer service. So that would be a first quarter objective. And then hand in hand with that objective would be 2 to 3 key results like client retention. Let's keep client retention at 90% or higher. Or maybe we're keeping track of some other quantitative measurement of customer service, how many times they're placing orders, or maybe we're doing customer surveys and they're ranking us or rating us. So we've got some way of measuring customer service. So every quarter we establish company-wide objectives and key results, and then there's meant to be a cascading effect, so that now then every department comes up with their own objectives and key results based on the company-wide OKRs. Every department comes up with their own set of OKRs. And then finally, every individual, every single employee comes up with their own set of objectives and key results for that quarter. And again, there's that cascading effect. So now there's this amazing level of accountability within the company where every employee, every department, the company as a whole knows exactly what they want to accomplish this quarter and how they're going to measure success. This comes from a book called Measure What Matters. So it's a good book on planning and specifically on this idea of establishing objectives and key results, OKRs.
Tim, what does a finished plan look like? Is it a 12-page document? Is it bullet points?
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked that, because I know when some business owners, when they think business plan, they're thinking of a book, like War and Peace, 700 pages. How are we possibly going to come up with something like that? And when a company, there are lots of different types of business plans. When a company is first launching, first getting started, they're going to write essentially a prospectus about the business, because usually what the reason they're doing that is to either attract capital. The bank wants to see a business plan, an investor wants to see a business plan, or they're trying to hire top talent, and that top talent wants to get some idea of what this business is about. So I'm going to write a book about my new business, and that makes sense. But once I'm in business, I don't need that book. I don't need that prospectus as a business plan. Instead, what I need something is far shorter, far simpler, and commonly referred to as a one-page business plan. And there are a number of different templates for one-page business plan. You mentioned Patrick Lencioni. He's got a template for a one-page business plan. The book Traction and EOS, they've got a template for a one-page business plan. And from those, I've kind of created my own version of a one-page business plan, taking what I think are the kind of best parts of each of those. And again, it's simple, it's concise. At the end of the day, we take everything what we've come up with through the strategic planning process, and we've put it into one page that now I can turn around and share that one page with the team, not only those that participated in the planning, but the entire team now gets a page. It's like, in football, every player gets a playbook, whether you're on offense or defense, they get a playbook. This is essentially the company playbook condensed to one page. And then also those parties outside of my company who might be interested, whether it's the banker, the investor, a strategic stakeholder, they now get a copy of my one-page plan, and now they have a better understanding of what it is that we're looking to accomplish in this 12-month period.
Tim, what are the most common mistakes that you've seen companies make as they go through this process?
Yeah, there are a handful that come to mind. Well, one is just not doing it, just assuming I don't need a plan, we're good. A second mistake, and we referenced this earlier, is not having the right people involved in the planning process. A third mistake is, and I referenced this earlier, and I was guilty of this, is not bringing in a facilitator, a third party to kind of guide us through this process of strategic planning. Maybe the biggest mistake, Trace, is once the plan is done, is a failure to communicate the plan. Not only, when we've finished the plan, but oftentimes what happens is, we come up with this plan and there's a lot of excitement. We have a kickoff party. Everybody's got a copy of it. And then the next month, there's a little less attention to the plan. And by month 6, it's like, didn't we have a plan at some point? Didn't we work on, I'm shuffling through my papers on my desk. I've got that plan someplace. We forget about the plan. And it's what I suggest to companies, there's got to be a kind of a plan czar, one person who's responsible for keeping that plan alive over the course of the year. And it might be the owner, the CEO, it could be anybody on the team who's just responsible for making sure that we're mindful of that plan throughout the course of the year. We don't allow it to die an early death.
Tim, you mentioned having a third-party facilitator come in, and I've been very fortunate. I've learned from the best. You've taught me how to be the facilitator that I am now, and I think I do a great job when I work with other companies facilitating. However, when I do the exact same thing here in my own company, it doesn't quite go as smoothly as it does when there's a third party that comes in. Why is that?
Well, it's using the sports analogy, it's like playing quarterback and being the referee at the same time. You just picture in your head, okay, you're taking the snap, you're throwing a pass, you're handing off, and then you're also throwing the flag for, a holding call or offsides. I think it's almost impossible to do both. Either one of those is hard, right? It's hard being quarterback, it's hard being the referee, but trying to do both of those at the same time is literally impossible, I think, to do well. And so to me, that's kind of a good metaphor for why both you need leaders in the company and you also need a third party, someone who's objective, someone who's comfortable asking the difficult questions. And you're good at that. You know that. You're asking, about the blind spots, asking about the failures, asking the difficult questions, going deep when it's necessary to go deep on a particular issue. You need that third party, I think, is kind of the magic ingredient to doing strategic planning really well.
Tim, if you could only get one point across about strategic planning today, what do you want that point to be?
Whoa, that's a tough one. Mike Tyson just fought a month or so ago. So I'll go to Mike Tyson on this one, and he's famous for saying, I'm probably paraphrasing. He said, "Planning is great until you get punched in the nose." And every company, once the plan is completed and you get into the regular course of business, every company at some point is going to get punched in the nose. Maybe it's a pandemic, maybe it's losing a key employee, maybe it's the economy goes haywire, and the ability to recover from that, to remain strong, and part of that is staying on course with a plan, because usually not unusual that when we get hit in the nose, we put the plan aside and we say, okay, let's go back to what we were doing before, or let's take a different path without really thinking through what could happen as a result of that particular decision. So just acknowledging that stuff happens during the course of the year, and the plan needs to be very resilient to those ups and downs, and just realizing that we're going to experience that, and the plan needs to withstand whatever takes place during the course of the year. I think that'd be the key takeaway.
Well, Tim, this is the fourth time. I really think you've been on more than 4 times, but officially, this is the fourth time that we've been able to look back in our record. So I have round 4 lightning round questions for you if you're ready.
Absolutely. Let's go.
All right. Question number 1. If you could create a holiday, what would it celebrate and how would people observe it?
Wow. If I could create a holiday, in business terms, I think it would be celebrating the people who support us in business, the spouses, the friends, the family members. I think it's easy to overlook how important that support is that we have in business. And we're so fortunate, that as you've got your family, I've got my family. I would not be where I am today had it not been for their support. And I think we overlook that. So a holiday to just recognize the support we get from those outside of the business and the impact they've had on the business.
Tim, what's a mantra or quote that you live by, and why does it resonate with you?
Yeah, I developed this one a number of years ago. Tracy, I'm an avid tennis player, and it's so easy when I'm playing tennis to complicate the game. In between points, if I've missed a shot, oh, I should have hit that ball. I can't believe I didn't hit it where I wanted to, or I mishit it, or that guy I'm playing against, he's doing all sorts of strange things. All this noise in my head between points. And so what I learned to do is before every time when I'm returning serve, I say the following: see it, hit it. Just to remind myself that this is a pretty simple game. That one, I got to focus on the ball, and not to just focus on the ball. I will focus on the seams on the tennis ball, which I can't really see, but I'm looking to try to see the seams because that forces me to focus on the tennis ball, and then just hit the ball. Don't overcomplicate. Too much spin, not enough spin. Hit it deep, hit it short. I've hit that tennis ball a million times in my lifetime. I don't have to remind myself, how to hit it. Just remind myself to hit the ball, see it, hit it. And I found that applies in business, that we overcomplicate business, I think, too often. And so when I get ready to speak, I'll use that same mantra. I'll just say right before I go on stage, I'll say, see it, hit it. Just, you've done this a million times. Do what comes naturally. Don't overcomplicate it and have fun. Enjoy it. See it, hit it.
I love that. Tim, what's the most adventurous thing you've done recently?
And well, you may recall, I don't know that we've talked since, I went back to the El Camino this past summer. This was my fourth visit, which just sounds crazy every time I say that. The El Camino, some of your listeners may know, it's a hike across Spain. And the traditional route is 500 miles approximately from the French Spain border, from the Pyrenees Mountains, all the way to the western coast of Spain. About 500-mile hike. And this hike has been around for centuries. It goes all the way back to one of Christ's apostles, and he was believed to have made this same trek, the same hike across Spain. And since then, every year, hundreds of thousands of individuals do this hike. And this was my fourth year, and I did what's called the Norte, the northern route that goes along the northern coast of Spain. Some beautiful coastal cities, San Sebastian being one of them. And then it dips down, joins the traditional route, and then ends up in Santiago, which is where the El Camino finishes, again on the western coast. And it was an amazing hike. I do it by myself, did it solo. And every time I do it, I think this is crazy when I first get started because I have to train for it. And then I have a backpack, and it's just me, my backpack, and the hike. But I love doing it, and I hope to go back at least one more time.
Tim, what is one thing you wish more people understood about being a facilitator?
Maybe it's how difficult it is, And again, I'll use the metaphor of the referee. It seems like such an easy job. If somebody's offside, you throw the flag. If somebody does pass interference, you throw the flag. But you and I both know that it's not that easy, and an immense amount of training goes into those individuals who are referees, and they start at the junior high level, and then they go to high school football, and then maybe junior college, and if they're lucky, they make it to the pros. I think facilitators, I've had people say, well, that's, how difficult can it be? You've got a meeting agenda, and you're just walking the team through that agenda, but they don't recognize all the things that you and I as facilitators have to realize. Because when I'm facilitating, I'm not only thinking about where we've been, I'm thinking about what we're talking about in the moment, And I'm also thinking about what are we doing 5 minutes from now? What are we doing an hour from now? And then I'm constantly having to read the room. Who's participating? Who's not participating? Who's holding back? That guy just stepped out. Why did he step out? Did he not enjoy what we're doing? Is he taking a phone call? What did I forget? Just a million things going on in my head at any given moment. I call it I'm the conductor, like of an orchestra, trying to get all the instruments to play together. I'm a street cop, I'm waving cars forward. I'm telling some to stop. And I'm a cook because I've got all these different ingredients that I'm putting together, hoping that some amazing piece of food comes out of the oven. So it's far more difficult, far more complicated, and far more enjoyable than anyone could ever imagine.
Tim, I have to say, being the recipient of years of your facilitation, you've always made it look easy.
Well, thank you, Trace. I appreciate that. And it comes through just a ton of experience, both good and bad. And trust me, it is not easy. And you know that.
Well, Tim, I want to thank you for once again coming on the Scaling Up H2O podcast and telling us about a topic that we should all be doing. And hopefully after we listen to this episode, we're going to do it. Of course, that's strategic planning. Thanks, Tim.
Trace, you're very welcome. You're the best.
Scaled Up Nation, Tim Fulton is one of my favorite people. I mentioned that when I introduced him. He has taught me so much throughout my time knowing Tim. And I have to say, Tim has never once given me advice. He's always asked it in a form of a question and had me come up with the solution. He is a master at that. And just one of the nicest guys that I have had the privilege to meet. And I met Tim through an acquaintance. So I have to say, if you're not out there networking, if you are not out there asking people who you need to meet, I might not have met Tim Fulton. And I can't imagine where I would be and what my life would be like right now, especially business life, if I had not met Tim Fulton. And I want to mention some of the things that we talked about today. We talked about a lot of the books that we both use. So I wanted to make sure that I did recapture those. We're going to have all of this on our show notes page. But one book we mentioned was The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And this is a great book to help you with your team leadership, not only the person that's leading the team, but every member on the team. And it should really be called The 5 Functions of a Team. It's done in a fable format where it talks about a team and the issues that they're having, and then this new team member that comes in and what she does to right the team, to put them on the right course. And of course, you learn about the dysfunctions that they have, and you learn how those things are fixed. And we, of course, talked about the leader being vulnerable. And hey, I don't know this. I'm going to admit that I don't know this to the team. That's me being vulnerable. And that does a couple of things. One, it allows us to deal with the issue. And it also opens up the advantage of other people being able to speak in that way. Well, I don't know this either, or I've had this issue. Okay, let's not sweep it under the rug. Let's not ignore it. Let's acknowledge it. Now we can fix it. And I love Tim's analogy that there's a flat tire and we're going 60 miles an hour. Well, folks, you cannot go 60 miles an hour for long on a flat tire before there is going to be a catastrophic issue. But so many teams are not only going 60 miles an hour, they're continuing to step on the gas. Well, there's going to be an issue, and that can be avoided when we start with being vulnerable. So that book is all about that. He also mentioned a book about one-page business planning, and he mentioned Traction by Gino Wickman. We've talked about EOS, the Entrepreneur Operating System, a couple of times on this show. So if you want to learn more about that, just do a search on EOS or traction on the search bar on our webpage, and all of those resources will magically appear in front of you. Now, a book that I mention all the time that takes strategic planning and then teaches you how to put it into action is the 12-week year. And I think this is one of the most simplistic and holistic ways to look at long-term planning and how to give it traction in the day to day. So we're going to have all of those listed on our show notes page. But I also want to mention some podcasts that I think might help you. By the way, the podcasts that we mentioned with Tim, we're going to have those listed on our show notes page as well. That was episode 22, episode 280, episode 368. So we'll have all of that listed. So if you want to listen to Tim a little bit more, and who wouldn't want to listen to Tim a little bit more? But another one that came to mind was on a book called The 4 Disciplines of Execution. And author Chris McChesney of the Franklin Covey Group came on episode 164 and spoke about that book. That is a great strategic planning book. And listening to episode 164 will give you a head start as you're planning to do your strategic plan. Now, of course, we are wrapping up the first quarter of the year, and we heard Tim say it. When is the best time to strategically plan? Well, it's right now. No, it's got to be the end of December or the beginning of January. Well, folks, it is the end of March. It's the end of Q1. And if you have not done strategic planning yet, now is the right time. And now you've got a format on how to do that. And no plan is a plan for failure. And not to mention how I mentioned to Tim earlier, it's really frustrating to your team when they don't know where they are and they don't know where they're going. So by having a strategic plan like what we talked about in today's episode, you are able to give your team empowerment to drive the things that matter most, to keep score on what they're doing and the teams that they are managing. And trust me, if you haven't done this before, it might seem like a daunting task, and it probably is. But once you do it and you see how it allows everybody to row in the same direction and communicate the same message, you will wonder why you didn't do this years ago. Now, you can't go back years and do it, but you can start doing it today. And it's my hope from this episode that that encourages you to do this type of meeting as soon as possible. Folks, we are trying to put out a discussion guide with each and every episode. We have heard so many teams that like to listen to podcast episodes and then discuss them with their teams. So we have a discussion guide for this episode, and that is available for free simply by going to scalinguph2o.com and downloading the free discussion guide. This will help you have a conversation with your team. And maybe this is the very first step of you having a meeting like this, is listening to this podcast as a team and then getting together and working through the discussion guide questions on how you all interpreted this episode and then what you're going to do next about it. Now, one of the things that Tim and I talked about was bringing in a third-party facilitator. Now, Tim is the facilitator of facilitators. He is just a master at what he does. I have been a student of Tim's for years, and I have learned so much by working with him. I've also learned that one of my favorite things to do is to work with companies like yours and being that third-party facilitator. So if this is something that you want to explore, it is one of my favorite things to do. I would love to talk to you about it, tell you what that looks like, and maybe there's a good fit. Or maybe if the good fit isn't with me, maybe I can recommend somebody to you. But I have to tell you, as somebody that leads a team, I think I do a really good job as a facilitator, and I've got some really good tools that I use. I've got some really good icebreakers, as we were talking about, but it's always a little bit different when I'm trying to facilitate and I have a role within that team. It's hard to separate both. And as Tim mentioned, all those things that he's looking for on the peripheral, making sure that the meeting is guided and going in the right direction. It's very difficult when you have a role on that team. It's very difficult to separate yourself. So I just want to throw that out there because I love doing it so much. So if that is something that is interesting to you, be sure to reach out to us and we're happy to talk to you about that. Scaling Up Nation, I am so proud to be the host of this podcast, of this award-winning podcast. We've got the Innovation Award for this podcast by the Association of Water Technologies last year. And that was just an amazing honor to stand up in front of the entire AWT membership and recognize all of you, the Scaling Up Nation, for allowing this podcast to be on the air and accepting the award, the Innovation Award, on all of the Scaling Up Nation's behalf. So just such an honor for me to host this podcast. And of course, the only reason I have a podcast is because you listen and because you are always letting me know what you want to hear on the next podcast or the next guest you want me to interview. So if you have any ideas at all for this podcast, do not keep those to yourself. Make sure you go to scalinguph2o.com, go over to our show ideas page, let us know what that is, because that's how we're going to make sure that we have thousands of episodes for you to devour over the years to come. Scaling Up Nation, I hope you have a great week. And as always, we'll have a brand new episode for you next Friday on the Scaling Up H2O podcast. Take care, folks. Join the Rising Tide Mastermind. Discover a community where passionate professionals come together to support each other's growth. Be part of a tribe that celebrates your wins and helps you overcome challenges. Don't navigate your journey alone. Find your community with us, the Rising Tide Mastermind. To find out more about the Rising Tide Mastermind, go to scalinguph2o.com/mastermind. Once again, that's scalinguph2o.com/mastermind. Find out if the Rising Tide Mastermind is right for you.